Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are super excited to have this amazing presentation about sake. I don't know about you guys, but I definitely don't know anything about it, so I'm excited to learn. So hopefully you guys are going to learn a lot too. Just a few thank yous before we get started and some housekeeping things. Just a huge thank you to Davidson's. Like always, these events could not happen without them. They're amazing, and we appreciate their support so much. And then also thank you to Nathan and Montana, who are with us tonight, and they are going to teach us all about sake and everything you could ever want to know about it. So we appreciate you guys being here. And then finally, just some few housekeeping things. Please try to stay muted so we don't have any background noise. And if you feel comfortable, please turn on your camera. It's a lot easier to talk to faces instead of a black screen. So if you do feel comfortable, please do. If not, no worries. And with that, I will go ahead and send it over to Montana to get us started.
Hi, everyone. I'm Montana. Thank you so much for having us. I am the Director of Marketing at Maverick Wine Company. So Maverick is a small boutique distributor here in Colorado. We represent a wonderfully curated book of fine wine and craft sake from Japan. Our Japanese importer, as well as some South American wines that we carry, is called Vine Connections, and they bring us one of the most special sake portfolios that there is, and we're so lucky to have it here in Colorado. We work with a sake samurai, which is a very rare, very rare accolade for a person to hold, and it's actually held by a young woman named Monica Samuels. So she is sort of the driving force behind a lot of the education that we do, and I had the pleasure and luck of going to visit Japan with her, so I'm gonna actually share my screen so we can get this going with you guys. But I'm going to show you a couple of fun photos from the trip, and I think if you guys are like me, it's not so much about just the education, but the experience that we provide and that we can have through through food and wine, and in this case, sake. So can you guys see that? Can I get a thumbs up? All good, awesome. So just to kick us off before I introduce Nathan, I want to give you a little bit of just fun, like eye candy to check out. Japanese culture is so unbelievably dynamic, and sake is a really important cornerstone of it. Everything that they do in Japan has a purpose and a meaning behind it, and it's very, very traditional, steeped in tradition across the board. So some of the images that you're looking at come from sake breweries. This is a very, very hands-on process, and some of the sakes that we're tasting today are actually produced by growers. So they actually grow the rice that makes the sake. They say that what goes into sake production is water, rice, and craftsmanship. So all of these are really intrinsic components to the sake that you guys are going to taste tonight, and Nathan will go into that in depth. So without much further ado, I'm going to introduce you guys to Nathan Frye. Nathan is a colleague of mine that has been working with us for just about 2 weeks, under a year now, and we are so lucky to have him. He's one of the greatest wine educators that I've ever had the pleasure of working with. He is a vault of knowledge, and he is going to take us through this tasting, give us a little bit of exploration, and then we are going to make a fun sake cocktail at the end together. So Nathan, take it away.
All right, well, thanks for that intro, Montana. It is a pleasure to be with everyone today. Hope you guys are excited to learn about some sake. This is something that's become increasingly popular in the United States, especially lately, but even in the last 20 years. So we're going to go over a lot of information about sake. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw those down in the little chat box, and we will answer those as they come up, or we'll get to those at the end. But hopefully you guys have all the ingredients you need for your cocktail at the end of our endeavor here, and you've got some glassware to drink the sake in, and you've been chilling that sake. So let's go. All right, so sake's success. This is the reason we're here. More and more Americans want to know about sake, and more Americans are drinking sake. So if you look at the bottom right of that slide right there, for the last 20 years, except during the 2009 recession, sake imports to the United States have increased. So that shows there's been a real consistency. On top of that, 42% increase in sake import volume over the last 6 years. So that's actually since 2013, because these are 2019 numbers, but that's a pretty big increase. with anything, much less an alcoholic beverage and much less sake. 6.4 million liters of sake imported into the US in 2018. That's less than 1% of what we import in wine made of grapes, but that's still a big level for sake. So the point of this is that sake is coming on strong and has been coming on strong, and it's just getting stronger. So one of the great things about this portfolio that we represent from Vine Connections is that the back labels, if you can grab one of the bottles that you've got there next to you, you check out the back label, you'll notice a lot of information. Now, most sake producers are not going to give you all of this, but you've got everything from the grade of the sake to the prefecture. We won't get into those specifically, but that's the region of Japan that the sake comes from. The rice strain, which is an important part of sake production, and then the profile. So you can look at the back of these labels, and when you see Vine Connections here, you will know that you've got all this information up here. So when you've got the profile, you'll be able to, that'll help you with some food and wine pairing opportunities. So we always like to tout this back label because it's more important than the front label a lot of times as far as giving you good information. So, all right, moving right along. So that's the old back label, but that's the information you're going to get. So that's one of the great things about the Vine Connections portfolio. So Saké Flavors, you guys should have this handout that we sent along. It's very colorful, a lot of information there. And the main point to make here is that the aromas and flavors that you find in sake are not foreign things. We, as wine lovers, and I'm sure the majority of the people here tonight are wine lovers, are used to things with aromas and flavors of flowers and fruit and herbs and spices, earth, mineral, and dairy even. You know, if you like a buttery Chardonnay, that's something that can be found in sake as well. But if you look at either side of this slide, there are a couple things that are going to show up in sake that don't show up in regular wine, in grape wine. And that's things derived from rice. So things like, you know, rice flour, bran, steamed rice, porridge. Don't remember the last time I smelled porridge in a Cabernet Sauvignon. That's probably not going to happen. But in sake, that's going to happen. It's derived from rice. Makes sense. And on the right, these kind of very umami-based flavors are derived from koji, and we'll get into what that is later. But you're not going to find those in your average Pinot Noir either. Generally, you know, pickled vegetables, meat broth, soy sauce, soy. Every once in a while, you get a meat tone in wines, but it's rare. So just want you to know from the outset that some of the flavors, if you encounter them that maybe are a little wild and a little different than wine, they're perfectly okay, and that's where they come from. So how to taste sake. So this is the fun part. So hopefully everybody has their vessel of choice. Let me check out this question in the chat here real quick. Oh, okay, great. So there's that Saké Flavors attachment if you guys don't happen to have it, but we've got it there. So as far as how to taste sake, it's a lot like tasting wine, but there are a few things to consider. So later on, we'll get into vessels for drinking sake. A wine glass is perfect, so if you've got that, that's great. There are other vessels. There are kind of the traditional little cylindrical ones called ochoko that are more for informal occasions. But you can get all the way up to like sakazukis that are very broad and a little bit more difficult to handle. But wine glasses are perfect, so if you've got that, we're doing well. So first thing when you're dealing with sake is similar when you're dealing with wine, is to look at the clarity of the product. So I'd like you guys to grab this first one that we're going to be talking about and tasting, the Tozai Living Jewel Junmai. So if you've got that, it's the blue bottle with the pretty little fish on it. So go ahead and grab that guy. Hopefully he's got a bit of a chill on him. All right, we'll give everybody a second to get poured. All right, let's assume everyone's got their stuff poured. Okay, so here we go. So first thing is looking at the clarity of the liquid in your glass. The main thing we're going to learn here is whether or not this sake is filtered or unfiltered. We're going to be dealing with an unfiltered sake at the very end of the course, but the ones that we're going to have up till then, the first 4 are all going to be filtered. So pretty much you're just identifying that style. Filtered sakes tend not to have as much kind of overt rice flavor as unfiltered sakes, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Second thing is it clear or kind of a yellow or even a brown color? Most of the time, most sake will have a kind of a pale yellow color to it. Those are sakes that tend to be higher quality. The majority actually, I'm sorry, the majority of sakes will not have much color to them because they'll be filtered through charcoal, and the majority of sakes in the world will go through that process and tend not to be very high quality sake. The sakes we're going to have today are higher quality, and some will be anywhere from clear color to that pale yellow color. And then we're not going to touch on this tonight, but I wanted to mention it. There's such thing as koshu as a style, which is an aged sake that will be a little bit darker in color on purpose. But if you've got a real dark colored sake, if it's a deep gold or if it's a brown color, it could be faulty. So unless it's koshu, K-O-S-H-U, unless you see that on the label, if you've got something that looks like it's that looks like a lager beer in color or darker, could be problematic. So that's it for color and clarity. As far as aromas are concerned, we kind of went over this earlier. We're dealing with some of the same floral, fruity, cereal situation. I'm sorry, floral, fruity, herbal situations, dairy situations that you would find in wine, and then some of those additions that we get from the rice or the koji. And then the next piece is intensity of aroma. Okay, so we're trying to figure out if this is light, moderate, or pronounced intensity. Same thing is going to happen with the flavors and with the intensity of flavor on the palate. Okay, so the actual process is very similar to wine tasting. So to identify clarity and color, we can put this against a white background if you've got that, or if you've got a napkin available, that's good too. Just kind of to identify the color and say, okay, this is pale-ish, and this is definitely clear, it's not cloudy, okay? So that informs us that it is a filtered sake, and it's in good shape. So next thing is the aroma part. Now, here's where wine and sake differentiate a bit. Typically, you're not going to see people drinking sake doing the swirling thing, which volatilizes aromas and kind of brings them to the top of the glass so you can experience them. However, there are more and more people doing that. So feel free to kind of go with your own feeling there. I'm so used to drinking wine that I find myself doing this with sake all the time too. So go with what you like. And then we want to check out the intensity, right? So good thing to do is to kind of stick your nose in whatever vessel you have and take one drawn in breath. You don't want to do the piggy snort thing. Want to avoid that. You also, if you're doing this, if you're roving for it and you're looking for truffles, you don't want to be doing that either. It's a very simple process with the aromatics. Just nose in whatever vessel you got, one drawn in inhalation, and that should give you your intensity, okay? So then with the flavors, what we're going to do is we're going to put enough sake in our mouths that we're not going to be like chipmunks, but it's not going to be barely enough to coat your tongue either. Just put a comfortable amount in there. And what's recommended by most experts is to, just like with wine, to volatilize that sake a bit, to do a little bit of a bubble, kind of a, if you imagine David Letterman, remember him back in the day, he had the little gap there. Imagine sucking a little bit of air in like David Letterman easily could do, and just bubble that sake a little bit. So that'll volatilize those compounds, get them back into your olfactory epithelium, and you'll be able to almost re-smell within your mouth. For some people, it's a little bit difficult at first, but we're going to try that. And then, if we can move on to the next point on the slide, then we'll kind of realize that intensity and also character of the sake once we've gone through that whole process. Okay, so that's an intense informational slide, but this is what it looks like in real time. Okay, so we are checking out the clarity and the color. Then we can swirl if we like. Check out the aromas with one drawn in inhalation. Okay, put enough in your mouth to be okay. Move around your mouth. swallow or spit. And some people will breathe out their nose. So that's called a retronasal route. And it's considered to be more important in sake than it is in wine, to kind of re-smell what you've already smelled and tasted. So hopefully that wasn't too much stuff going on at once. But here I'm hoping that you're going to be able to see, to be able to sense the sweetness or lack thereof, the acidity or lack thereof, because sake is a low acid product, and kind of the texture, the level of alcohol. Sometimes there are effervescence in these sakes. There are a lot of kind of bubbly sakes on the market lately. And then the finish. Notice how pronounced the finish is on this sake, and it's only going to get better from here. So how was that sake tasting experience? Yeah? All right? Okay, good. All right, let's move on. So let's talk about this guy in particular, Tozai's Living Jewel Junmai. So Junmai, if you don't know what that means, we're going to get into that later. But Japan's colorful koi fish are called living jewels, and that's the reason for the label here. They're symbols of good luck and good fortune. Rice polish to 70% or less. So we're going to talk about Junmai and rice polishing in another slide. The great thing about this sake is it is an excellent entry-level sake in the quality sake world. So it's light, it's fresh, easy drinking, it's a crowd pleaser. This is one of those that you can bring over to anybody's house. You can use it any party, you can use it anytime you're having sushi at home, whatever it is, and it's always gonna hit the mark. So white grape, anise, and citrus are some of the flavors that are typically found in this one. Generally speaking, higher quality sake like this, anything that says Junmai on the label, is going to be served chilled. However, I just watched a documentary not too long ago where a master sake toji, the people that run the production at sake breweries, was heating some of the highest quality sake and serving it. So it makes, I don't know. So maybe you could serve this guy warm. But with sushi, grilled salmon, roast turkey, I mean, the thing to know about this one is that it's super, super versatile and really affordable too. So hope you like this one. And we are going to move on to a little bit more information about sake. So the next thing to know, what is this stuff, right? It was produced in Japan. It's had been produced in Japan since 700 AD. Okay, so it's been a while. That's as long as they've been able to find formal information about the history of sake production. So here's an important thing. It's pronounced sake, not saki. And also in that documentary, it's called Kenpai. One of the guys who's actually a sake producer in the United States was calling it sake. Don't be like him. Sake, we're going to go with sake, right? And Montana can tell you that. You know, she was recently in Japan, and sake is the way we do it. So, and this is an interesting point. So in Japanese, sake refers to all alcoholic beverages there. However, Nihon shu is the word for what we call sake if we were in Japan. So shu is kind of the representation, and usually that's hyphenated, for what we would see as sake. So if you go to Japan, you just ask for sake, that's like us saying booze. Well, give me some booze, and they'll say, what do you want? And so then you would take a picture of the slide and you'd say this. So there are four main components to sake. Number one is water. Quality is what it's all about. And an important point is to have a very low iron content. So you can see the amount up there, because through the sake brewing process, there's something called CASE, C-A-S-S-E, that can be developed if you have too high in iron content. But the good news is that Japan as a country has a lot of fantastic water sources, and a lot of the differences in minerals given different locations will help give differentiation between various sake styles and various sake producers. So it's part of the beauty of sake is every different location inherently is going to have those different factors just because of the water, along with other things. So koji is super important. It's a fungus. It's the source of enzymes that help to break down those starches in the sake rice into fermentable sugars. So if any of you guys brew beer at home or are familiar with beer production, then you'll probably know a lot about malting barley. It's kind of the same thing. So, you know, the amylase enzyme in beer brewing from the malted barley process helps break down those starches so that you can ferment things. And it's similar here, you know, except you've got spores that are inoculated, and then they germinate, they grow, and they create these enzymes. So similar concept, but it's all about the enzymatic activity to be able to release that starch from the rice so that you can ferment it into an alcoholic beverage. Next, yeast. So this is an interesting thing. Of course, we all know that it takes yeast to create alcohol. But the Brewing Society of Japan since 1906, and I just learned this recently, has been giving what they call cultured yeast, or offering cultured yeast to every producer in Japan if they want it, and abroad. And they'll offer different types of yeast to give different effects in a given sake. So there's an entire array to choose from as far as what the Brewing Society of Japan can provide you. However, ambient yeast, of course, before that point was traditional. So it's whatever yeast is in the air, is in the brewery that they can introduce, is going to be the yeast that is helping to ferment that sake. And there's a movement back toward that, kind of getting back to the heart of what, you know, what's going on since 700 AD up until 1906. And we're going to see some of that in what Fukucho does, which is one of the sakes we're trying today. And then the last thing, the two major rice subspecies from Asia, Japonica and Indica. And if you live in Colorado, Indica may mean something else to you, but it's the first one, that first rice strain, that is the one that we make sake out of in Japan. All right, so moving on, sake rice, just a quick little fun graphic here. So in the field, it's taller and it's wider and it weighs more. And so it's got a lot more starch, less fat and less protein. And starch is what is fermentable. So that's why it's favored for sake production. All right, so I thought this would be kind of fun too, because I'm sure most of us, a lot of us, drink beer and wine. So here's a little comparison chart. But you know, two of the interesting things on here, actually several interesting things, the alcohol content in sake tends to be higher in average, and glutamic acid. So that's related to the amino acid glutamate, and that compound's responsible for savory flavors. So if you look at that line across, look how much higher that is for sake versus white wine or beer. So that statistic kind of shows that, you know, that umami flavor you're going to find in sake is going to be fantastic with umami flavors that you're going to find in food. And it also works generally really well with food too, because it kind of reflects the natural umami that happens in so many foods. Something else, that succinic acid is kind of like it almost gives like a bitter, salty quality. And that's kind of mid-range. In white wine, you can find that a little bit higher, and that has a lot to do with, well, a lot of other chemistry, but that's a pretty interesting piece. Tartaric acid at the very bottom, white wine, it's so high in tartaric acid, and there's none in sake or beer because tartaric acid is only really found in grapes that they use to make wine, and not many other things on earth. So that's pretty interesting too. So I thought in general this would be kind of cool to see. In the last piece I wanted to show you is the middle, sorry, there, the titratable acidity. So the acid levels are generally lower, and we'll go over that later on too. All right. So, second sake. You guys ready? All right, everybody remember your tasting modalities? Great. All right, well, grab your vessel and grab your sake. Let's do number 2 here. All right, so there you have it. Tentaka translates to hawk in the heavens. Hawk, a symbol of prosperity and good fortune, okay? And Junmai, we will go over that again later. But this guy, dry, crisp, rustic, yes. Rich, yes. That mixed nuts quality, this is an umami bomb. I've loved this sake for years and years. And it is excellent with those things at the bottom. If you guys have anything that is dealing with kind of grilled or braised meats, this hawk in the heavens, it'll knock your socks off. So let's check this guy out. All right, we'll wait for a second for pouring time. And if you guys have any questions, you know, don't be bashful. Please throw them up on that chat, and either myself or Montana will answer those as quickly as we can. All right, so let's check this guy out. All right, so let's put him against the white surface we've got. That's a clear sake, huh? All right. So consider the intensity of this sake versus the last one. There's a lot more concentration here. Definitely some of those umami notes that are noted on the slide there. And I mean, imagine this. Imagine having this with a bite of like a salty, fatty something. It's a match made in heaven. Well, hawk in the heavens. And I didn't plan that. I swear I didn't plan that. Okay. All right, let's move on to the next one. So sake grade levels. All right, so I've alluded to this a few times. So this little chart we're going to bring up, low grade sake, so usually less expensive, lower quality stuff, is at the bottom here. And the higher quality stuff is at the top. So when you're looking here, if you look at just kind of from the bottom of the slide, left to right, Futsu is considered poor quality sake or typical quality sake. Okay, so about, I mean, 3/4 of the sake that's produced in the world is Futsu. This is general table sake. As it says here, there are no minimum requirements. And well, there it has the 75% of the entire sake market. So this is usually what you're going to get when you're going out to an izakaya or a sushi restaurant, Japanese restaurant, and they're pouring you something that comes in a wooden box, a lacquered wooden box, and it's hot, and it tastes like sake, and it's not that exciting maybe, but you're still, you know, your company's party, or you're out with a date, or you're doing whatever, and you're kind of cringing through it. That's what you've been drinking. Unfortunately, most Americans, that's their experience with sake. It doesn't have to be like that. And that's the reason we're here tonight, and that's the reason you're here tonight. So the good part is that it gets better. So if you look at the non-Junmai, the one in yellow there, those in yellow, there are varying levels of added ethyl alcohol, so alcohol, to those styles. And that actually developed because of rationing that had to happen in World War II with rice. So not all the rice could be used in Japan for, you know, sake production that they would like, because it had to go to the Japanese troops. So they started using ethyl alcohol from other sources, and ethyl alcohol can be made out of a lot of sources, and that's, so where they've come from has changed, but the addition has not changed. It doesn't mean that these are inferior products. It doesn't mean that these styles are inferior either. They're just different than the blue category, which is brewed using just rice with no addition of alcohol. So if you look at these guys, kind of the yellow and the blue together, Honjonzo and Junmai are on a similar level. Junmai Ginjo and Ginjo are on a similar level, and Junmai Daiginjo and Daiginjo are on a similar level as far as rice polishing goes, which you can see in the red section. I know this is very confusing, but the thing to remember here is that the stuff in yellow, if you see that in particular on a label, that means that they did add a bit of alcohol to that style. If
Hey
you
Nathan,
see,
I just wanted to add too, you know, it might sound like a negative thing to add the alcohol, but in some cases it's actually done very intentionally because it can really help to enhance some of the flavors that are happening inside the sake. So it sounds like, oh, you know, something that was done to bridge a gap, which it sort of was originally, but now in the world of premium sake production, it can be done very intentionally to really help lift the aroma and the style. So it's not a bad thing, like you said. I just want to reiterate that there could be a why that's not a negative.
yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, I had a Hanjozo last month that was one of the best sakes I've ever had. So it really depends on the style of the producer, and as Montana said, kind of how they're using it, why they're using it, and mostly these days, I mean, they're using it very intentionally. So as far as the rice milling on the left side here, you'll see the 70%, 60%, 50% at least for those styles. So basically the gist here is, if you consider, you know, a big, let's say this is a piece of rice here. The more you mill it down, the smaller it gets, and the closer you get to the starch. So the starch is the fermentable piece of that rice, the fermentable portion of that rice, and the less of the exterior stuff that is not lending itself to the overall flavor profile, basically the smaller the better. So as you can see, as you go up, if you've milled away at least 50%, you're getting closer to that kernel of starch in the middle. And the more kind of ethereal, complex style of sake you're going to be able to produce.
The way I think about it is like an egg. So like the starch in the middle is like the yolk, and then everything on the outside, it's not as great, like if you're making something, but that's kind of where the jewel is in the center.
That's okay. So that's perfect. That's a great way to visualize that. The closer to the yolk you get, the higher quality. All right, so the sake brewing process, we're just going to cruise through this really quickly, but it's complex, like you would expect. That rice polishing, if you look at the top left of that slide, is what we were talking about just previously. Washing and soaking of the rice, do some steaming, and then the making of the koji is, if you can see that guy's kind of spraying the koji on there to create the koji rice. Filtering happens in most circumstances. Pressing, brewing, yeast starters. Again, we said that, you know, there are some situations where you now have native yeast fermentations, and that's getting more popular these days. Pasteurization, so that's, you know, we all know what pasteurization is, but that's an interesting thing in sake. Usually, most sakes are pasteurized twice. But there are other styles that are not. So the maturing and then dilution, usually a little bit of water has to be added, well, to a lot of different styles. So anyway, that's the general overview, all right? Okay, so we wanted to mention a few other things, and then we're gonna go on to the next sake. But these are important terms that you guys are gonna see in our Colorado market on your sakes. So genshu, so undiluted. We've got a couple of fantastic genshu. They're usually higher in alcohol. They're more concentrated, of course, because they've been undiluted. But Bushido is one that you may have seen out there from us. It's got a little black can. It's got a little fox and a couple of swords behind him. And that stuff is fantastic for camping, and it's delicious. Nama, it's only pasteurized once to retain freshness. Most sakes are pasteurized twice. And then Namazake, unpasteurized. So if you guys ever see Namazake or want to ask your local retailer, Davidson's for instance, for Namazake, when those things come around, they are very, very special. It's kind of the version of, you know, before we could get unpasteurized cheese, when we couldn't get unpasteurized cheese in the United States, and going to Europe and actually having unpasteurized cheese. It's that big of a flavor difference sometimes. So nigori, we're going to be having a nigori at the very end when Montana goes through the fantastic Sno-jito with you guys. It's coarsely filtered and has little rice particles. It can be literally slightly sweet or give the impression of sweetness with those rice particles in there. And you guys will be able to experience that soon. Tokubetsu and Yamahai. Okay, so these are two other things that you may see, and you can see the explanation there. Yamahai is pretty cool stuff. We've got one called Cowboy Yamahai that has a black label, has a gold bowl in the front, and it is the most flavorful sake I've ever had in my life. A great one to look for in the markets. So just wanted to mention these in case you guys see these and wanted to write that stuff down. All right, so moving right along. The Wandering Poets. Okay, everybody, grab your next bottle there. So it's got a beautiful front label. So the Vine Connections people have been excellent about helping curate this collection, and also have been instrumental in helping to name these sakes. So you know, it's wonderful when you can kind of put together the sake itself and kind of the poetry behind the sake, and it's really cool that the famous 8th century Chinese poet Li Po was part of the instrumental naming of this sake here. So many rice types are available, different strains of rice when you're making sake. This one, for instance, is considered very high quality. There are some producers that are bringing old strains that have almost died out back into population, and that's pretty cool too. So really interesting rice type that we're dealing with here. This is Junmai Ginjo. So if you remember from that chart, as far as polishing is concerned, this is a higher polish level, so 60% this time at least. So we're getting closer to, as Montana put it very well, closer to that yolk of the egg, and closer to that starch. So we're getting a little bit more ethereal, a little bit more complex. This one also very crisp and clean, really broad appeal, and banana, honeydew, a little bit of herbaceous notes here. This one's a little bit fruitier than the last one. Hawk in the Heavens tends to be a little bit more rustic, and it's just a different expression. Of course, served chilled, and this one goes really well with greenery. So if it's green, and if it's something that you don't think you can match with a wine, for instance, this is a great sake to have on hand when somebody says, okay, well, I'm a vegetarian, for instance, you know, or I'm wanting to go all salads today. If it's a luncheon. Or if someone just brings an asparagus spear and says, hey, we need to eat this, and you know, pull this one out. So, all right, let's go through it. That's a good question. Okay, so we got a question, and thank you for sending that. Does it have to be made in Japan to be considered a sake, like champagne has to be made in Champagne, France? Montana, what do you think about that?
Technically, yes, but they do allow the labeling to it. So being that newer to the marketplace and broader distribution of premium sakes, there's a little bit more, they're sort of at the level where champagne was 20 years ago, where people were getting away with it at wineries in California. They were able to label champagne, and then you know, things changed where people said, we got to regulate this. It's diminishing the quality of true champagne. So it's sort of on a similar life journey, if you will, for the sake world. They are allowing, even locally here in Colorado, we have a brewery here in Denver that is labeled as sake. We represent a really cool brand called Brooklyn Kura, which is made in Brooklyn, New York, that is namazake, so unpasteurized, as Nathan mentioned. They are like, the only reason that they're in the Vine Connections portfolio is because they're so focused on true quality and authenticity with the products that it wouldn't be just, not just anyone would make the cut. And there are a handful of different producers around the country that make domestic sakes. I'm not so sure about abroad outside of Japan, but I'm sure it exists. But that's one that's really cool to check out if you kind of want to nerd out and experiment with something that is made stateside. Brooklyn Kura is, there's not a whole lot of it, but it is cool if you come by it. I'm not sure if Davidson's carries it, but we can get some to them if they want to try it.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. That's a good explanation. Sounds like they're not quite at that place yet as far as delimiting Japan as the area for official sake? It's an excellent question. And also,
Well,
Brooklyn
and like
Kura,
you said, sake in Japanese refers to any alcoholic beverage. So whereas champagne is a sub-region of France, or a region of France, sake, it's like trying to put a regulation on the word booze. That would be kind of hard to do.
we could try.
Yeah.
So Brooklyn Kura, it's Kura. So if you guys are checking that out, check it out, because they do an excellent job for sure. All right. So sake containers, we had a great question before we started about sake containers. And, you know, as far as what's generally available for the average American consumer, this is the way to go. And I'm assuming most of you guys are going wine glass. It's nice because typical traditional Japanese containers are opaque. So difficult to kind of appreciate the sake in that way. As I mentioned earlier, the ochoko, which is at the top of the screen there, I'm sorry, at the bottom left, which these are fairly wide ochoko, by the way, but they're usually a little bit closer with more kind of narrow walls, but are for informal occasions. And then ginome will kind of span out there, so that what was actually shown there is kind of in between. And then the sakazuki are kind of obscenely wide and very difficult. It's like holding a bird bath in your mouth, you know, toward your mouth and trying to drink that. But the O in ochoko is an honorific prefix, which I thought was kind of cool and wanted to mention. So masu, these are the wooden boxes that you've seen when you've gone out to a sushi restaurant. And I think all of us have had, as Americans, an experience in some sushi restaurant where somebody pours some hot stuff into a box like that. This is not to alarm anyone, but sometimes, depending on the manufacturer, et cetera, sometimes the wood can affect the taste of the sake. Nobody's going to die, everything's fine. But that is not an ideal vessel, because A, you can't see the stuff, and B, there's that chance. So I would say stay away from
And
those.
how do you hold that to your mouth? There's like nothing ergonomic about that.
That's a good point. This is not an ergonomic vessel either. Well said. The wine glasses I've seen at a lot of sake restaurants, especially in the last 10 years, going stemless. So it's a little bit closer to the kind of ochoko, but then you've got, it's translucent. Brilliant, you know? So that may be the best vessel we've got as Americans. And I wanted to mention the tokuri, the server set. So you can buy these, you know, everywhere, but it's a beautiful way to kind of bring that sake experience home. If you've got either those kind of stemless wine glasses or ochoko with that tokuri, really neat and a really fun way to go about your sake drinking. So the next piece is kind of sake service and etiquette. So, you know, and Montana can certainly speak to this, being in Japan recently, but this is kind of the line by line expectation if you are in a formal situation, or if you're trying to kind of have a sake experience at home. So I might let Montana kind of read through this and maybe let us know about what experience she may have had in Japan.
Well, the first thing that I will say is that when you're in Japan, the thing to not do is ever let your glass get empty, because Japanese people pride themselves on hospitality so much that if your glass is empty, they will refill it and you will get very drunk. So you have to be careful, because they're always watching for your plate to be empty or your glass to be empty, because they're like, oh my gosh, you must not be satisfied. I'm going to get you some more. So you have to kind of watch out for that, because they're giving you just a little bit, and that's all you need to taste and explore. But the points that he has on here are totally accurate. It's very much a presentation and a demonstration of respect. So you're holding with two hands. If you're to present a gift, you'll provide a little bow and hold with two hands, or even exchanging a business card, something as simple as that, to really show that your undivided attention is on the person that you're interacting with. Sometimes we kind of do a flyby in our American culture, and obviously things are changing now for all of us with the lack of handshakes and things like that, but it really is a very focused exchange, whether you're being poured a beverage or provided with something like a business card or a gift, anything like that. Certainly, they always expect that someone else will pour sake for you. So the flip side of what I said about not letting your glass get empty because someone will pour it for you, is that if your host has an empty glass and you're like over here in La La Land and you haven't filled their glass up for a while, they're going to be like, hey, you know, they'll give you a break because you're American or wherever y'all are from, but they'll be like, hey, can you get me a drink? Because I'm literally parched over here. You want to lift your container off the table. They'll let you slide because you're foreign. But you really want to treat it like it's a precious little gift, which it is. And then angle toward pour to make it a little easier. We all know when you're trying to pour wine for someone and they're doing that thing where they're moving their glass around trying to help you, but it's definitely mostly about focus, I think, than anything on the person that you're working with or dealing with or socializing with. And then you can go one-handed if you're superior. So that's a whole nother aspect of Japanese culture. What makes a person superior? Always, you know, a person in a position of power at a business meeting, if they're the owner or manager, someone above you. If you're a guest, you're always going to be the guest of honor. So it's really beautiful too. That's kind of the tip of the iceberg about some of the intrinsic values of Japanese culture that I think we've all kind of touched on as we explore sushi dining or seeing movies or whatever, but they really do hold it in high regard at all times. And there might be one more. Sorry, I'm trying not to mess the slides up.
That is perfect. Thank you. I mean, that's excellent insight, you guys. Okay, so as far as storing sake, bringing it back home, it's very similar to wine too. So keep it dark. Light strike can be a problem with any alcoholic beverage, with any beverage really. So that's why your beer bottles are brown and green. That's why you've got darker colored wine bottles in general. Light strike, just light penetrating whatever's going on in any of those alcoholic beverages can cause problems, specifically with amino acids in sake. And that can cause haze, it can cause a darker color, it can cause an off flavor that's called zatsumi, which essentially equals a flavor fault. You don't want that flavor fault. So also keeping it upright, this is different than typical wine situations, but sake is not, I mean, it's almost never closed with a cork. So you don't have to worry about keeping it on its side. When you keep a sake upright, you are not touching cap, and most caps, it's not a situation where there's going to be any problem with any material in the cap infiltrating the sake, but also there's less surface area there. So always a good idea to keep it upright, kind of like we're seeing in the middle of the slide there with that refrigeration piece, and keep it cool, of course, because, you know, chemical reactions happen more slowly at lower temperatures, and so development happens more slowly. Always a good idea to keep it in the fridge. Now, here's the thing about drinking sake, as far as it being young, generally speaking, in Montana, I'd like your opinion on this as well, but you know, sake has a decent shelf life. This graphic on the bottom left about Namazake versus Koshu. Namazake is a style that doesn't see double pasteurization like most sakes do. It's not pasteurized, and you want to drink that younger. Then there's Koshu, which is aged on purpose, and you would drink that, you know, further on. As far as the average sake though, that is double pasteurized, where's the target area, do you think, for drinking?
I realize I'm muted, sorry. Another nice thing about, maybe not all, but I think most of the Vine Connections labels is they do show a bottling date. I'm not sure about all of these. Oh no, they do. I'm seeing it here. This says 7/20 on there. And I think they all do. Yeah, I see it on all of them. Lower right-hand corner of the front label or somewhere on there. So it's nice because since sake is non-vintage, you don't know what vintage the rice was harvested per se. The bottling date is on there for reference. So really, like, a year would be very fresh and wonderful, but you know, obviously with distribution and getting it overseas to us and all that kind of thing, 2 to 3 years would be ideal. And you know, you'll kind of know if it's been sitting on a shelf, even pasteurized sake, because like Nathan said, it will start to deteriorate and get some of those more brown amber qualities. and the colors. So if it's not koshu, which is intentionally aged, which is some funky stuff, you guys should try it just to have like a little something to compare it to, just for the sake of if you want to feel like a geek and try something different. But if it's turning brown and it doesn't say that, it could be because it's older. And a lot of sakes, even premium ones that are not, it's another reason why we prefer working with Vine Connections. They don't often say when it was bottled. So you really don't know. So that's a nice thing about these. And you'll see that all of these are quite fresh. I see on the Hawk in Heavens, that was 2020, 2020, 2020. Looks like these were all bottled in 2020. So we're getting them quite freshly. And we do go through a significant amount of sake in Colorado and across the country from them. So the turn rates are pretty good. But what I really love is that even though these are all small bottles, so they're not as much to drink, but if you were doing a wine format like this and you were opening 4 bottles of wine, you always run into the thing where if there's just you or you and one other person, it's a lot of wine to go through, and you keep it in the fridge even if it's reds to keep it fresh. But with the sakes, you can have these open upright for like a month in your refrigerator. So it's awesome because the best way to learn about anything is to taste it side by side with like types. Like these are all different styles. Obviously, it's why we chose them for this. But if you open a sake and you like it, unless there's, if there's something really wrong with it, that's a problem. But if you like, that's a good sake, but you have nothing to compare it to, you don't really learn anything. So the beauty of this kind of thing is like we're expanding and learning on different styles so that you can compare them directly next to each other. So if you feel like it at the end, get out 4 glasses and retaste all of them side by side and kind of play that game, because it's really cool. And with these sakes, or most premium sake, you can put it in the fridge and have it for a month. And we'll get into the cocktail at the end, but sake cocktails are super fun, sake cocktails. So you can use them as mixers, and there's so many different versatile things that you can do as far as food pairings, and we'll go into all that stuff. But that's the shelf life in your house is really, really great. A lot longer than wine.
And those are great points, and that's exceptional, so it's exceptional given that it's very different from wine, generally speaking. And by the way, on the right side of that slide is the Ancient Treasure, and that is a koshu style. That's one that Vine Connections carries, and then we have available to us if you want to try the aged style, super aged style of sake. All right, so moving right along, Fukucho. All right, everybody grab your bottle. Let's go through that tasting process one more time. This is Fukucho is a fantastic story. Miho Imada is the female brewer, owner, and toji, who's the person that is in charge of all the production. And that is very unusual in Japan. So she is a superstar out there. And they revived, yeah, there you go. And all the information's on the back label. There you have it. And even her picture. I love that. She also was responsible for reviving an heirloom rice variety. And, they're doing exceptional things. So Junmai Ginjo, we talked about the rice polishing. This sake is known for being more vibrant, soft, and having kind of a minerality to it. We talk about that in wine sometimes, and that certainly holds true here. This one is more delicate and kind of on the lighter, brighter side of sake, with a lime, melon, fennel, white pepper. Again, served chilled because this is high quality sake. If anybody can make me lobster or shrimp risotto, I can give you my address. Another good choice here, an unusual choice, but something that you can do with sake that isn't typical with a lot of wines, is you can go from lobster to a high cacao content dark chocolate. That is, there's no wine that I know of that has that kind of range. So it's a very special sake. All right, so let's go through it together. So, when we were talking about intensity before, this is not as voluminous and broad as the last sake, but oh my goodness, the flavor doesn't stop. This is super impressive and a really fun sake to drink. And with all this background about this particular sake, I hope you guys are enjoying it as much as I am. So, all right, let's move on. So temperature, we've had, drink cold or maybe warm in parentheses previously. There are three ways that you can drink it really. I mean, hot, room temp, or cold. But typically, and we have kind of glossed over this as we've been going through the process, the hot sakes are usually the lesser quality sakes and the ones that are going to be in this masu and you're going to find in sushi restaurants. Room temperature, that's kind of up to the producer and the style and how they want to present that or represent that style. But to be on the safe side, if you're drinking quality sake, chilling it doesn't have to be cold, doesn't have to be freezing, but chilling it is usually a good idea. So if you're enjoying how you are tasting the sake tonight, then continue to do that. If you want to experiment with temperatures, maybe try this one, throw a little bit in the microwave tomorrow morning and see how that goes, then do that too. It's fun to experiment to kind of find your right temperature. But these are general guidelines. And I also wanted to mention the Hello Kitty glasses that we have there in the middle. I bought a set last night and today, but I didn't know that.
I do think, you guys, it would be kind of an interesting practice. I will say that typically what you get for hot sake in restaurants is going to be like very, very hot, and they usually have it in the machine and it like dispenses out. Don't heat the crap out of these guys. These are really beautiful premium sakes. If you want to try them, go more warm, maybe put it in a pan on the stove and just gently heat it. Don't get it to a boil, because while they are structurally more sturdy than, say, a wine, you don't want to like take it to a boil. So just kind of watch it, and when it starts to kind of percolate, then pour it off and just have it like just under where you would like take to a boil. So it's not getting like fried, and then you can explore what you think with it. Because I love a warm sake. I think we have from the Tozai line, the first one we tasted, we have one called it's a futsu called, I don't remember what right now, but do you remember anything? But it's kind of something that you can drink chilled or warm, and it's very, very, very nice to have with a lot of different foods, especially with winter coming. Like, warm sake is amazing, but typically what you get in the restaurant is that stuff that has a lot of that distilled liquor added to it. You're gonna have a wicked hangover. So many people are like, I don't drink sake, I got such a bad hangover from it, is unimaginable. And this is where we like to like convert people and change their minds about it, because you can drink, I mean, I can attest to this, I've drank quite a lot of this stuff, and you really won't get as vicious of a hangover as you can even get from drinking too much wine, because they're very, very clean.
Yeah, all good points. So experiment with that and heat it up whichever way works for you, especially coming into these cold months, or like last week. That was crazy.
Yeah.
So some of the advantages of sake, and these are important points, you guys. Sake and rice is naturally gluten-free. So if you have someone that's celiac in your family or your group of friends, and you want to introduce them to a beverage that's going to be fun and still a-okay for them, where they're not going to feel terrible in the morning, a great way to go is sake. So premium sake is not produced with any added sulfites either. So if there's a legitimate sulfite sensitivity, that's a good option. Sake also has very low histamine levels, and that can occur in a lot of different types of wines as well. So if you flush when you have red wine, for instance, you may have a histamine problem. Sake is not going to present that. Also, and this is a big point, is sake is very low acid. As I mentioned very early in the class, tartaric acid it's in grapes, and it's in a few like Amazonian fruits. It's very rare. So you're not going to find that in sake, and there's no malic acid either, which is kind of that tart green apple acid that you're going to find in wine typically. So it's a low acid product. So if somebody says, well, I don't like white wine because it's got too much acid, you go, hey, have you had some sake, some quality sake lately? And it's also high in amino acids, as we spoke about earlier. So those savory qualities about sake that don't exist in wine, in abundance, really enhance sake's ability to pair with food. So speaking of sake and food, we just went over several of these points, but the third one is one that I'd like to talk about. Is it kind of moderates salty flavors and suppresses fishy smells. So that's one of the natural pairings that has occurred with sake production and, you know, sushi, sashimi, a fish-rich culture in Japan. It tames the aldehydes, and those are the compounds that create that fishy smell. So it's a match made in Japan and heaven simultaneously, I suppose. But that's why those things work out so well. So something else that's cool is that the koji that we talked about previously, that fungus, is used in soy sauce and miso production. So if you guys are using, or if you guys are preparing some sort of dish that's got soy sauce or it's got miso, obvious, easy pairing. And also cheese. Do not neglect this pairing. There's so many ways to go. I mean, you could buy all 5 of these guys, buy 5 random cheeses, and just have a blast going back and forth with your friends, doing cheese and sake pairings and seeing how those guys align. So don't be afraid when it comes to any food in pairing sake. All right, so we're on to our final sake of the night. So this one is amazing. Snow Maiden, it's named after a koi fish, and they had a name for the koi fish, actually 2, Hanoko and Flower Maiden, at the base of Mount Ontaka. In snowy water, this thing lived for 226 years. So that deserves an homage, if you ask me. So we talked about, when we're tasting sake, the difference between kind of clear sakes and unfiltered sakes. The unfiltered sakes are nigori. So when you see that nigori on the label, you'll know, okay, this is going to be a little cloudy, coarsely filtered. There's going to be some rice particles in there. It sometimes can have an impression of slight sweetness. This is a fairly dry style of nigori, which is fantastic because it doesn't get cloying at all. The texture is creamy. It's full-bodied. It's rich. And it's got this comfortable fruitiness to it, you know, as we have here, you know, honeydew, raw pumpkin, radish, maybe, but this one always seems like such just a warm style of fruity quality. You can serve this guy chilled, or you can make it into a cocktail. And on that note, I would like to reintroduce you to my friend Montana.
Okay, so sorry if I missed this because I was kind of moving myself around, but you saw that there's a lot of sediment dropped down to the bottom because it's an unfiltered sake. So rather than just shaking it like crazy, I like to just kind of do a tippy over a couple of times and kind of get that sediment moving around. It's not going to create a crisis if you like shake it really hard. It's not carbonated or anything like that, but I love this sake for cocktails because it's super versatile. And as we're going into the season, we are like already thinking about October. I've had friends that have had about 7 pumpkin spice lattes already by now. So you're starting to think about like those pumpkin flavors. What can we do for some of these more like fall cocktail things? And this one is actually sort of summery and fun in that way too. So I love making cocktails at home. I am no mixologist and I have very basic supplies on hand, so don't laugh at me, and hopefully you guys are kind of in the same boat with like your tools and what you have on hand. So real quick, Nathan already went through, or we had like the tools on the front page when we started, but I'm going to go through what you guys are going to need. So you have a cocktail shaker. If you don't have one, maybe a mason jar with a lid or anything with a lid would be fine. And then a shot glass. I have one that says Colorado because that's the type of thing we do around here. And measuring cups. I don't have measuring spoons here, long story, but I do have a tablespoon, some agave nectar, club soda, and then this is my masher. So this is a whisk. It'll work though. So what we're gonna do is, if you didn't already take a second to slice up your strawberries, go ahead and do that. They don't have to be perfect or anything because we're gonna mash them really good in there anyway. So just take a second, chop them up, give them a little bit of a break, and then we'll start to assemble this drink. So he also said a tall cocktail glass, but again, making cocktails at home, we work with what we have. I'm gonna use another wine glass because the alternative was pint glasses. I'm gonna admit it, I'm at my boyfriend's house and this is a man's house. He does not have like glassware or anything normal that you would expect. So that's my disclaimer. So we're gonna take the strawberries, 4 large ones, throw them into your tin. And then your mint leaves, which you can just kind of tear up or smash a little bit. When I was a bartender, I used to just like take them in my hand and smash them, and then we'd always strain them out so nobody would see that we had mojitos, because if people see mojitos, everybody wants one. It's a pain in the ass. So from there, we're gonna do the agave nectar. I'm not gonna go too fast. I wanna make sure that you guys have a chance to like kind of take this in, but so far we just have the strawberries and the mint leaves in the tin. And then I'm gonna take my good old fashioned spoon and go for 2 teaspoons of agave nectar. If you like a little bit sweeter style cocktail, go ahead and you can add a little bit more, but don't forget that the sake itself has a little bit of sweetness on its own. So this first one that you've ever made is gonna kind of give you a little bit of an indication of how it can be, and then you can adjust and start to play with flavors and kind of invent your own stuff. And if you do make any cocktails that you really think come out good, please share them with us, because we're always trying new flavors and stuff. So send them to the gals and they'll pass them on to us. It's super fun. What? 2. Okay. And then the juice of half the lime. So I just cut the slime in half and I'm just gonna squeeze it in there. Maybe you have a juicer on hand. Keep it simple though if you want. Okay, and then for the liquids, I don't have a like ounce measuring cup, but I just have my regular measuring cups. It should be a liquid one, but again, like don't worry about it, it's fine. So for the 6 ounces, that's gonna be a 3/4 cup. I've got that here, and that's gonna be the Tozai. The only thing you're not gonna put in there, so don't get ahead of me, is the sparkling water, because if you do, it's gonna blow the cap off of your shaker. So make sure that your sediment's kind of mixed in the Snow Maiden. All right, and then we're gonna muddle, muddle, muddle. So this is kind of the fun part. Get those strawberries pretty crushed up too, since we are gonna strain them out. You wanna make sure that you have a good strawberry and mint flavor in there. Grab my ice. All right, throw the roof on that tin, make sure it's secure. Hold on with the little cap on top with your other hand, and then give it a good shake. All right, if the lid gets stuck, you just crack it on the side and it'll pop off, or on the side of your counter. And then grab your glass and pour. Sometimes you want to shake your tin a little more, get all that goodness out. I want to like set my screen so I can see all of you guys doing this. Yes. So you can use a Collins glass, you can use a wine glass, it really doesn't matter. Get the best of it out, and then grab that club soda, throw it on top, little as much as you like. Let it explode. And then I'm going to cut a little lime wheel because I love the essence, the smell on the side of the glass. And There you go. Let's see them, you guys. Hold them up.
Oh, yeah.
That's awesome. Oh my God, it has this like frothy topping that just happened automatically with the soda water getting involved.
And you know, it looks good in the pint glasses. It looks good in the champagne flutes too.
Absolutely. Sorry, I clicked the thing. My hands are wet now.
There we have it.
Yes. So I can think of so many other things. We've done things with this for like Mardi Gras. God, we either with gin. Do we use this sake? I think we did. There's so many things that you can do with try with the other ones too. Experiment with your favorite spirits. See a little, and if you go to the Vine Connections website, www.vineconnections.com, they have a whole section of sake cocktails. And like I said, they'll last for a long time in the refrigerator. So it's a really fun thing to play around with, try something new, explore the flavors. And there you go. Do you guys have any questions? We'll go ahead and unmute if you'd like, and just let us know your thoughts, feelings, anything that's come across your mind that you'd like us to cover before we wrap up. We can just drink together too, that's fine. Don't be shy.
So are you guys enjoying the cocktail? Thumbs up? Thumbs down? How are we? Thumbs sideways? Yeah? I love it. Oh, the beachers with the cheer. I love that. That's beautiful. You guys are awesome.
All right, if there's no questions, I guess we can wrap it.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much. Oh, looks like there's one that just came through. Let's see. Chad said that he found the hawk fascinating and he got a lot of the ramen on his nose.
Yes, that umami quality really comes through in the hawk. It's one of my favorites. I'm glad you liked it.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys so much for being with us, and thank you, Nathan and Montana. This was awesome, and a lot of great information. I hope you all enjoyed learning about sake tonight, and we hope that to see you guys back here in 2 weeks. We have a cooking class and a wine pairing, so look forward to that, and visit our website for a little bit more information on that. But thank you again. We really appreciate you guys being here. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Looking forward to the next time. We'll see you guys soon.
Thank you, everybody.